Can everybody hear me? Is that better? All right. So we'll just jump in. I'm going to try to go through some of these. Some of the slides I may skip over because I want to give as much time for questions or comments that you might have. And then I have my notepad. I'm going to be taking notes because it's really important, and why we come out side of the state of Maricopa is to listen to Arizonans. When we talk about budgets, I think some people's eyes glaze over, but my job is just as much about people as it is about the numbers and how this budget affects you and how you feel about it and what isn't in here that should be in here. All of those things are really important to us to hear from you, and so I want to make sure we have enough time for that. So I may skip over some of the slides that I think may not be as pertinent to our conversation, our time here today, but if you want to talk about it, we can, all right? So the governor in his State of the State mentioned his common sense approach to governing. We're calling it the Arizona way, and it comes with a clear mandate that government should run at the speed of business to decide faster, respond faster, resolve faster, add more services online, and save taxpayers money. And the fiscal year 2021 budget does exactly that. We included a video here, and I think it's really important to show. It was the teaser for the State of the State message that the governor gave last month. And it really gives you a sense of what's going on in his mind, how he sees the state of Arizona, and the opportunity and optimism that is visible across the state. So we're going to watch this. It's about a minute, but it's a pretty good video. That's the governor's take in 1 minute on where he sees Arizona and where we're going. And there's a lot of optimism at the Capitol right now, a lot of energy, and we think that this budget helps accelerate that even more. So over the next half hour or so, I'll hit the economy, both on the national and state levels, and their impact on state revenues. We'll talk very briefly about supplemental funding. For those of you who are in governing, the budget is out of date the day after it's passed. Things turn out differently than the way you thought they might, and so we are following through on some of our commitments. A budget overview of where the money is going by area, and then we'll hit some of the key priorities within those governmental areas. So on the national stage, we've seen some uptick in growth over the last 2 years, certainly surpassing the 10-year average. GDP growth, the rate of the value of our economy has increased at 3 to 3.5% over the last 2 years. But we do expect, and that is buoyed by high consumer sentiment. There's optimism amongst consumers. And we have a healthy labor market, 50-year lows with unemployment nationally. Now, we are expecting a return to more normal growth, which is 2 to 2.5% on the national level, and that will affect our revenue forecasts in 2022 and 2023. So we do have a cautious outlook. We're not using rosy revenue numbers to fund this budget, and I think that's really a key point to make. Even still, Arizona is a growth leader in its own right. The #1 inbound U.S. state in the country, which means of all the people moving around in the United States, the plurality of people are moving to Arizona. They're choosing Arizona first across the country. #2 in the country in terms of manufacturing job growth, and I know that you are probably feeling that here in Pinal County with Nikola and Lucid, among others. #3 in the country in terms of construction job growth. Now, we do have more manufacturing jobs today than we do construction jobs, which we haven't seen in a long time. But what's really interesting about this is we're still growth leaders across the country in those two sectors. And if you look at the last 10 years, the growth has been steady. steady and, in our view, sustainable. Whereas if you look at construction job growth in particular, in the mid-2000s, you saw a bubble that ultimately burst as part of the Great Recession. So that tells us that there's durability in the economic expansion happening here in Arizona. From a general fund revenue, and the December figures aren't up there, and we're still waiting to firm up January's, but we're at about 9.1% through December in terms of general fund revenue growth year over year, over 9%. Now, to put that into perspective, we budgeted for 4%. So that is a significant bump, $261 million year to date in cash. Our revenue forecast for this current fiscal year is being revised upward by about $400 million. Now we're at around 5%. So we went up from 4, which we budgeted for, to about 5.2%. Not the 9% that you see here, because we need to wait for April and May when most of Arizonans file their taxes, and we can see the impact that the tax reform package that we passed last year is going to have on state revenues. But still, we're in a really good cash position. From a taxing perspective, we are very competitive. We have the 14th lowest state and local tax burden in the U.S. On average, we tax about $3,500 per person in Arizona compared to the national average of $5,000. We're proud of that. And we're able to have lower tax rates and collect the kinds of revenues we're seeing come into the state general fund. We think that they both work together for our job creators to have a competitive environment there, to hire more people who then in turn pay taxes at competitive rates, which funds our government. But we have a number of tax cuts that we've adopted here that affect both the individual as well as our businesses. And we rank third in the country in terms of our state economic momentum ranking. They look at a number of economic indicators that show the health of a state's economy. We're number 3 in the country. This year, we're proposing our largest tax cut yet for veterans. We want to fully exempt veterans' pension pay from state income taxes. Right now, we only exempt $3,500. The governor wants to make Arizona the home base for veterans. We appreciate and honor our veterans. After their service in the military, they continue to be pillars of our community, public servants extraordinaire, and we should be honoring them for their service, not taxing them for it. This will save a veteran pensioner about $840 a year. Now, shifting to the spending side, I think this is a really important chart to point out. You can see that, I don't know if, no, there's no laser on here, but at the beginning of this chart, you can see what we were spending from the general fund, close to about $8 billion at the beginning of the last decade. In the 2021 budget, if enacted, we'll be spending $12 billion. Over the last decade, we've added $4 billion in new spending. We've restored recession-era cuts. We've rolled back many of the funding suspensions that we employed, whether it was shifts onto the city or onto the county or onto our schools. But the important point to make here is that we've done it in a sustainable way. We haven't been reckless in restoring many of our funding commitments that went away in the Great Recession. $4 billion added over the last decade. And we've been able to maintain structural balance. We've had the longest run of structural surpluses since 2000. That means we have more ongoing revenue coming in than we have ongoing spending. And if you're facing that, and if imagine facing that in your own life, that's a problem, especially for our cities and towns. If you have more ongoing spending than you have ongoing revenues, not a good sign. But we've been able to maintain structural balance while increasing spending in targeted ways that affect Arizonans the most. And you can see at the end of 2021, we have a projected cash balance of $164 million in the table below. The legislature typically likes to see cash balances at $50 million. So we've bolstered our cash reserves, which helps provide certainty for budgeting purposes and helping us manage our cash flow even better. We're not repeating the mistakes of the past. As I mentioned earlier, there was a ramp up in ongoing spending. In the mid-2000s, between 2004 and 2008, annual ongoing spending averaged at 11.5%. And while the governor's budget this year increases annual ongoing spending by 7.2%, if you look at his track record as a whole, it's 3.9% overall, well below the mid-2000s, well below the post-recession average of about 4.5%, and well below the 38-year long-run average of 5.2%. So this is, in our view, a very sustainable, conservative fiscal approach to budgeting. Last year, we proposed putting $500 million into our state rainy day fund to help secure Arizona's fiscal future. It was the single largest deposit that we made since back in 1991. It brought the balance up to $1 billion, and as a percentage of general fund revenue, it was about 8.8%. And we actually signed legislation to raise the cap that you can have in the state rainy day fund from 7% to 10%. So we didn't get all the way there. But it is consistent with what fiscal experts are saying Arizona needs to weather the next Great Recession. This year, we're wanting to maintain that balance at 8.8% of general fund revenues, and we're depositing $25 million into that rainy day fund. Our supplemental funding at $65 million. The one I'll point out is the fully fund the SFB building renewal grants. SFB is called the School Facilities Board. It's the school capital agency for the state, and provide funding for new schools and for repairs to existing schools, district schools. It's our obligation, and we're fully funding that. Presidential preference election, I wanted to note there, $3 million. That's in addition to $4 million in the base, and that's consistent with what the County Supervisors Association and the Secretary of State requested, so that we can fully fund the presidential preference election this year. So, budget priorities. If we had done nothing, no new initiative spending, just baseline only, and using our revenue projections that we're seeing through December, we would have an ending cash balance in the next fiscal year of nearly $1 billion, $965 million. So this kind of gives you a sense of where that money went. $25 million went to the rainy day fund, and then $776 million went to executive initiatives, a majority of which is one time. And that's another budgeting tool that we have to help improve our fiscal position. Rainy day fund, curbing the rate of ongoing spending, certainly maximizing one-time initiatives, and maintaining structural balance. Spending at a glance, where does the money go? Just on the executive initiative side, on the pie chart to the left, 58% going to K-12 and higher education. Now, when you consider the baseline and the initiatives on the right-hand side, that you can see that the number is actually less. It drops from 776 to 727 because a lot of the funding in 2020 was one time, and we backed that out. But still, K-12 education and higher ed take the lion's share of our funding. So let's talk a little bit about some of these items. Education, $608 million in new K-12 investments. The governor said, since taking office, that he's going to fully fund education above and beyond student growth and inflation. Those are commitments that he made, and so the $145 million for that baseline, that is enshrined into state law and our Constitution through Prop 123. $463 million he's adding above that with the teacher pay raise, the final installment of 20 by 2020. They'll talk fully restoring additional assistance, which is a huge, huge deal for K-12 schools. Closing the achievement gap with an innovative new program called Project Rocket, and then we'll talk about some of these other programs as well. Now, I think this is an important conversation. You may have heard, if you follow any of the education groups or the state capitol, this concept of per-pupil funding. They've said that, well, we still aren't at 2008 levels. Well, this is what they're talking about. This is per-pupil spending as adjusted for inflation. Now, this isn't the actual dollar amount that we send out the door, but if you want to compare apples to apples in 2008 to today, you would adjust it for the rate of inflation. And you can see that back in 2008, we were spending about $5,339 per pupil from just the state-only spending. That doesn't include local property taxes or federal monies, okay? But about $5,339. In the 2021 budget, we will spend $5,250. So still not at 2008 levels, but 98%. Next year, we're going to be over 2008 levels. And I think that's an important point to make, that we're shifting the paradigm here of talking what we did back in 2008, looking behind, and instead focusing on what's ahead. This is exciting. I think this is going to shift the narrative. But the other point to make in all of this is we started out in office at a per pupil amount at $3,958. We have increased what we're spending per student in Arizona at a faster rate than at any other time in the last 2 decades. So we recognize the needs of our public schools, and we're prioritizing them with the rate of growth and what we're spending in the classroom. Shifting to higher education, $102 million there for higher education investments, one-time operational funding, which I'll talk about a little later, as well as the New Economy Initiative, an innovative proposal coming out of the Board of Regents to really highlight some of the degree programs at U of A, NAU, and ASU. We also have quite a bit of money for the rural community colleges and fully funding the STEM formula, which will affect Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal County. The $1 billion promise was the 20% average teacher pay raise for teachers by school year 2020. And this is the final installment, $175 million to raise teacher pay by 20%. In addition, we also said that we were going to restore a formula called additional assistance. This is a soft capital formula in state law. It's flexible. Schools use it to repair buildings. They use it to buy new textbooks, update their technology, school buses. They can also use it to pay for personnel. It's been suspended in part since 2009. Last year, we accelerated the funding by 1 year. We were going to roll it out 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. We would fully restore the additional assistance formula funding at $371 million. We accelerated at 1 year, rolling what we would have spent in 21 into 20. This year, we're rolling forward the rest of our commitment here 2 years ahead of schedule, fully funding additional assistance for the first time in over a decade. And that's going to have a huge impact on investments that our schools are able to make. We're more than doubling the Safe Schools program that provides social workers, school counselors, and cops on campus, or SROs, to our schools. Last year, we added $20 million to the program, and we expanded what kind of grants we would award. Originally, it was just for cops on campus, but we recognize that school safety is a multifaceted and that social workers and school counselors do play a very important role in the mental health of our students and our staff. So we expanded the program and brought the total amount in 2020 up to $32 million. Well, we received $70 million in requests, first choice requests. There were several schools that submitted applications for many people at one school site, and that was about $90 million. So what we're trying to do here is say, of all the first choice requests at $70 million, we'll fund that. We're adding $38 million for that program, and I think that's going to really, A, help our schools out, but B, it's going to, I think, increase the pipeline of school counselors and social workers going through our universities, because there's going to be a job waiting for them when they graduate. And right now there are bills at the legislature to create a special loan, a tuition assistance program for school counselors. Project Rocket, this is a 3-year pilot program, $44 million a year for 3 years, so $132 million total, to help turn around high-need, low-performing schools. We've been doing this pilot since 2015, where we provided about $150 per pupil to 3 schools, Avondale, Wickenburg, and Deer Valley. And they partnered with a proven turnaround expert, coaching, summer professional development, teachers gathering to look at student data to figure out, how we can better reach some of our struggling students. And we've seen amazing results so far. Passage rates on tests are up, attendance rates are up, teacher retention rates are up at these schools. We want to expand it statewide, allowing all D and F rated schools access to Project Rocket, as well as our higher poverty C schools. They have to come up with a plan within their district, finding a proven turnaround partner outside of their district, submit their proposal to the State Board of Education, and then we're going to monitor it quarterly to understand what kind of progress is being made here and what course correction is needed if necessary. But this is, I think, an innovative way. We've seen it in Utah as well, work, and I think that this is, it's putting accountability with the investment we're making, which is important in our view, as opposed to just writing a blank check and hoping that things get better. This is a strategic approach. We're recognizing more schools for the results. This is part of the results-based funding program. It provides per-pupil funding to A schools, and we're including higher poverty B schools to recognize the work and the effort and the resources it takes to achieve that ranking. And we do provide differential funding per pupil for our high poverty A schools versus those who have lower rates of poverty, $400 per pupil at the higher poverty A's versus the $225 at the lower poverty A's. And the idea behind this is to allow these schools to open up more seats for kids, to replicate their models elsewhere, to help other schools that need help get on the right path. Building renewal spending, this is the grant program that districts apply to get air conditioners or roofs fixed. As I mentioned at the beginning, $35 million supplemental for the current year. And you can kind of see those lines. The bottom line shows what we spent on building renewal grants back in 2018. Then the middle line is 2019. That top line is 2020, and we're projected to exceed our appropriation. What we've seen is a ramp up in building renewal spending, in large part because in the mid-2000s, Arizona schools were going through a big building spree, either to address deferred maintenance or to accommodate new schools or new students who were coming into the state. Many of the facilities are reaching the end of their useful life. The air conditioners, are coming up on close to 20 years now, and those need to be replaced. So this is expected, and we're going to fully fund our commitment to our schools. We're also changing how we build new schools. Last year, we were able to achieve a significant policy goal. We would build schools 2 years after the kids showed up on campus. We'd have to ascertain that your student count is now above the capacity, and then school. Well, where are the kids going to go? They were in portables. They were in classrooms that had to be renovated, that weren't as ideal for learning. Last year we said, no, we're going to project student count 2 years out from when we think that that school will be at capacity. We'll start building the school so that they're ready to go day one. This year we're taking on another challenge with our new school formula, and that the per square foot costs are about what we're seeing 50 to 60% below what the actual costs are. And this is another, we're currently being sued in court for school capital funding, and this is one of the issues that they've raised that we take very seriously. So we are updating our square footage calculations by between 50 to 60% depending on the school configuration. Now I noticed that we have a bullet point that gives you an example of what that might mean for urban districts, but it applies across the board, rural, suburban, or urban, and then it depends on the configuration. So this is a major overhaul of the school capital, new school construction formula. Shifting to the Teachers Academy, we are number 2 in the country in terms of overall growth in our College of Education enrollment. Number 2. There are only 5 states that saw growth in their colleges of education. So primarily teachers going to be, students going to become, learning to go become teachers. Arizona was number 2, and we have one of the most diverse cohorts in our colleges of education. We think it has a lot to do with the Teachers Academy. This is a concept that Actually, Fred Duval on the 2014 gubernatorial campaign came up with. Governor Ducey said, that's a great idea, let's do it. It's essentially, if you join the Teachers Academy and receive your tuition paid for every year you receive support, you agree to teach in an Arizona public school classroom. So you can graduate debt-free, provided that you commit to teaching in one of our Arizona public school classrooms. We started out this program in fiscal year 18 with about 200 people in the academy. We now have over 2,000 people. And we are including $1 million to ramp up our marketing, recruitment, and outreach, certainly at the high school level of getting more students into the pipeline, but we've also expanded who can join the Teachers Academy. You don't necessarily need to be in the College of Education to be in the academy. If you're pursuing a degree in biology, you're passionate about biology, we want you in the classroom teaching biology and science, sharing your passion for that subject with our students. Targeted investments for community college, the STEM and Workforce Program Aid Fund, Program Aid formula, $11 million for that. We're going to fully fund this formula for the first time since it was created. Rural community college districts, $6 million to the 10 rural community college districts for flexible operating funding, as well as $4 million for the Arizona Commerce Authority to expand the Arizona Advanced Technology Corridor. Pinal County has already participated in this, as well as Pima and Maricopa. And the idea is to identify the top 3 industries in your area and funding to build out the curriculum, the equipment, to help offer more credentialing programs for students. And my understanding, and I was just chatting before the presentation, that this is already happening in Pinal County with Lucid and Nicola and some of the credentialing programs. People are graduating from them, and they're skilled up to take on the jobs that are going to be here. Public safety, $164 million. I'm going to touch on a few of these very quickly. The Lewis and Yuma locking, fire, and HVAC replacements, we're fully funding that. We're doing a pay raise for our correctional officers. I know that's a big issue, especially here in Pinal County. We're doing a 5% pay increase there. We do have a bed management strategy that I will address in the next slide, as well as substance abuse treatment funding using the Voter Protected Medical Marijuana Fund. We're including $33 million to provide additional bed management capacity space, which does involve the deactivation of the Florence prison facility. Florence and the nearby facility in Iman, just 3 miles down the road, have the 2 highest correctional officer vacancy rates in the Department of Corrections system. This is a very dangerous situation for our staff and for our inmates. We cannot do a lot of our second chance programming. We can't provide educational services or substance abuse treatment counseling or the workforce training types of programming if we can't secure the facilities for those programming to occur. So we are proposing to vacate and close the Florence prison and shift the staff at Florence across the street to Iman, as well as open up other opportunities for the folks at Florence to move. Some drive from Tucson, some drive from Phoenix, and we've kind of had a policy in place because of the critical staffing areas that we can't allow people to move and transfer to other prisons because of the skeleton crew that we have there. So that will begin sometime in calendar year 2021, early 2021. Won't affect the census. I know that was a concern of some people because the counting for the census is occurring this year. And we're working very closely with Pinal County and Florence to determine a number of logistical issues that need to happen for this to occur. We're going to prioritize our county jails first to see what kind of inmates we can place there. Usually those might be inmates on detention status, inmates that don't necessarily require as much programming, they just need to be secured. And then we'll move in order, county facilities, followed by other vacant beds in the Department of Corrections system, followed by other Arizona private prisons, and then out-of-state private prisons in that order based on the custody level. We think that this will save about between $152 million to $400 million, could be even higher than that, because this is a 1908 prison, at least $152 million in building renewal. That exceeds the replacement value threshold of when to do building renewal or when to just completely build a new prison. And so based on some of our conservative estimates, $400 million would be the cost to build a new prison, although Utah is building a new prison right now of a similar size as what we would need for Florence, and that total is coming in at $800 million. So we haven't built one in about 6 years, so that is going to have a big impact, and one of the reasons why we decided to move down this pathway. We're also getting fined from a federal judge for not providing, in what the plaintiffs suggest, adequate health care. And there are a number of performance measures, and we're fined so much per failed performance measures. The fine was originally $1,000. At the end of January, the judge raised it to $100,000. So that's going to be a significant impact, as well as we're thinking about how we can do this. Because if we consolidate Florence and Iman, we're also going to be able to consolidate our healthcare staffing. Florence and Iman have the top 2 vacancy rates in terms of healthcare staffing in our complex. So we'll be able to consolidate those staff, hopefully improve our healthcare, and meet the compliance measures. We're expanding substance abuse support, $8 million for additional treatment, substance abuse counseling services. We're going to establish a medical loan repayment program for counselors who agree to work in our prisons. $1 million for new employment specialists to help those who are convicted of drug possession get ready to go back to work once they finish their sentence. And then an access reach-in program, that's our state Medicaid program, where we would set up appointments for behavioral health or physical health appointments before our inmates are released, so that we want them to get a job, we want them to find permanent housing, we want them to be able to get to their job and get the treatment that they need to stay off drugs and stay in the workforce, including a number of initiatives to address wrong way and impaired driving. You can see between 2008 and 2018, the number of DUI arrests in Arizona increased by 156%. And other indicators of growth, the Arizona population only grew by 11%, the number of vehicles registered 26%, the number of driver's licenses 21%. So the number of DUIs has outpaced any of those indicators of growth. So we're increasing grant funding to local law enforcement. The mayor may be familiar with the DUI Abatement Council, so we're putting in $8 million there for enforcement to conduct more DUI traffic stops. We're adding more DPS troopers for our night watch to focus on the DUI squad. We're adding 9 members to the DUI Preventive Investigative Task Force of the Department of Liquor. This is going to be a task force that handles severe cases of DUI. In many cases, we need to understand where the point of last drink is. Our liquor establishments have to be responsible stewards as well. And so this will help us improve our enforcement efforts so that we're not over-serving people and getting them off the road as quickly as possible. And then $1 million for new thermal cameras to detect wrong-way driving throughout the state. We're including more funding for 2 replacement helicopters at DPS. There's only 1 that they have in the fleet right now that is below the 10-year standard. The rest are very old. And these helicopters perform dangerous missions. They need to be in good running order. So this will help put us on the life cycle replacement as well as vehicles to replace them on a 6-year cycle so that we don't have to have a number of cars that are just outdated. We're investing in our public safety radio network. In northern Arizona, there is no radio connectivity in many parts of the northern part of the state. So we're including about $45 million roughly to build out the microwave backbone in northern Arizona and upgrade the microwave backbone down here in southern Arizona to convert it to the latest digital technology. We're including body cameras for DPS troopers. to improve transparency for the agency and safety for our officers. Other targeted public investments, $21 million there. Some of these things are being funded out of vacancy savings in the department, which is forcing them to keep positions held open to fund inflationary costs at the crime lab or some of their computer lifecycle replacements. I'm going to skip over this. This is a very interesting one. The business one-stop. The governor wants to move a lot of our services online. There's a technology right now that we're working that will be a one-stop shop. You enter your information once. If you want to start a business, it'll be kind of like a TurboTax experience for you to file your LLC at the Corporation Commission, your tax license with the Department of Revenue, and your trade name at the Secretary of State, all in one click of a button. So this is a very exciting program. There are other phases that go along with it, but they're additive in nature, so you don't necessarily have to add on more of those phases. This will be the baseline business one-stop that will, I think, make a huge difference in Arizonans interacting with their government. I'm going to skip over this one. Connecting Arizona, we're adding $60 million roughly in smart highway corridors. We're laying conduit for broadband, the entire length of I-40, the entire length of I-17, and the entire length of I-19. The length between Phoenix and Casa Grande, there already is conduit in the ground. So that's kind of what we're trying to do with the rest of the state, this very expensive first mile backbone that will eventually result in more connectivity for our public safety, our highway, and for businesses and education hospitals. We're adding $10 million to the Rural Broadband Grant Program. It's more than tripling the size of it from last year. And this is an opportunity for places like Casa Grande or Pinal County to apply for broadband grants. We've seen middle mile requests or even last mile requests that we've funded with entities leveraging monies to really build out their broadband infrastructure. This is a big one. $28 million to accelerate the I-10 expansion to 6 lanes, both ways, all the way from Phoenix to Tucson. I was just driving on that stretch this morning. I'm like, how is it that we have millions of people in the Phoenix, Pinal County, and Tucson areas, and we have a 2-lane road? I mean, it is just, we have outgrown that, and we've outgrown it many years ago. The bridge is the key. We're working very closely with the Gila River Indian community on getting the bridge expanded to 6 lanes. Once we get the bridge expanded, then that paves the way, no pun intended, for the other parts of the I-10 to be expanded to 3 lanes each way. Creek Bridge, I'm not sure if anybody is aware of this issue, but basically 1,500 homes are stranded on one side of the Tonto Creek basin, and you can see the number of days that basin, or that the road has been closed going back to 2014. 75 days in 2017, that area was closed, and then the 1,500 families have to drive almost an hour around, and some can't do that or don't want to do that, and that resulted in the deaths of some kids last year. So we're working with the feds to get funding for that. Air quality attainment, this is going to be a continued effort to raise awareness about how to control travel, when to carpool. We're embarking in a remote testing pilot program that allows us to understand when your vehicles are emitting more than what should be happening. And then we have a voluntary repair program where we'll pay for you to repair your car to get the emissions back in line. So it's I think, a very helpful approach there. The Water Quality Assurance Revolving Fund, we're fully funding that. That hasn't happened since 2007 using the statutory formula. It's the state EPA, or the state Superfund program to clean up soil and water. We're increasing the amount we have for wildfire preparedness, and we're paying back some of the debts we owe to the federal government for their help in fighting fires. $54 million in targeted investments for kids. We're increasing access to child care for working families and foster families. We're boosting the adoption subsidy for hard-to-place children, children with significant disabilities, and sibling groups, where the adoptive parents may need to buy a new car, a larger car. They might need to renovate their house to meet the special needs of these two vulnerable populations. A pay package for DCS caseworkers. The grandmother stipend, this is the kinship stipend that is primarily used by grandparents who may be taking care of their grandchildren. They didn't expect to do that. They probably didn't plan to do that. And this helps keep families together while providing assistance to the caregivers. $6 million to continue our opioid fight against opioid abuse. This will help treat 18,000 uninsured or underinsured Arizonans. $400,000 for a suicide mortality review team. This is part of the action plan that came out last year. And we will look at every suicide that happens, understand the root cause, and then that may inform policy making or funding proposals in the future. But we do have one of the higher rates, higher than the national average. Rural tourism marketing, $1 million there for target cities and helping cities here in Arizona build out sustainable tourism so that they can manage the flow of traffic so everyone can enjoy Arizona's beauty. We're adding additional veterans benefits counselors, $416,000, primarily in Indian country and in western Arizona, but we are wanting to add more in the coming years. Fiscal discipline, $12.4 billion in total revenues with a total spending of $12.3 billion, the rainy day fund deposit of $25 million, and positive ending cash and structural balances. So the important thing to note here is that we want to keep Arizona as a destination for have a new start, a new job, and they're here, more jobs and people to fill them, and it requires a government that is very responsible, that promotes economic prosperity, that lives within its means, and we think that this budget helps accomplish those principles. So the budget's available online. We're negotiating it right now, and happy to take any questions or comments that you might have.